The sun was nearly gone when they left her there, neck deep in earth, the dust of the desert clinging to her lashes like the final kindness of the day. Her mouth was cracked from thirst. A line of dried blood ran from her nose to her lip. No one looked back. Not her sister, not the preacher's wife, not even her husband. They said the ground would judge her, that if God wanted her, he'd free her by dawn. If not, well, buzzards had their place in creation too. The wind came low that evening, not with a whistle, but a hush, as if even it had shame about what had been done. Night took the color out of the plains, and stars blinked awake above her, cold and cruel. She didn't cry. Her tears had gone with the last child, the one who stayed inside her too long and then not long enough. The silence swelled. Mice rustled near her ears. A beetle climbed the ridge of her collarbone and paused as if it too needed to decide whether she was woman or stone. Somewhere, coyotes laughed. Time slowed. Memory returned. Her mama's lullabies, soft and strange in the Kiowa tongue, came back first. Then the smell of soap root. Then the feel of her first daughter's hand in hers, before the fever took the child in spring. Her thoughts blurred like heat off the prairie. She counted heartbeats. She named stars. She did not pray. The second night, she bled from her mouth. Her tongue was so dry, it cracked at the center. She couldn't move her neck now, couldn't blink without it hurting. She thought of her womb not as something broken, but as a quiet room no one visited anymore. By the third day, FLIs came, not in swarms, but patient and clever, as if they'd heard stories about barren women left in shallow graves. That morning, hoofbeats came faint over the ridge. Slow, steady, a rider alone by the sound. She didn't dare hope. Hope was a crueler thing than buzzards. He rode a dun mare, lean and tired-looking. Dust clung to his boots and the brim of his hat. A rifle hung from his saddle untouched. He stopped not 10 feet from her. Didn't speak. Didn't dismount right away. Just looked at her. Her eyes swelled with light, but no water. Her mouth tried to move. No sound came. He slid from the saddle finally, walked the short distance, knelt beside her, and with a slow hand, brushed the dirt from her shoulder like she was a thing that could be lifted and carried. His voice came, low. You're safe now, that was all. He started digging, not with panic, not with rage, just calm, like a man unlearning the sin of the world, one handful of dirt at a time. He worked for hours. By the time the sun rose, the earth had loosened its grip, and she lay trembling on her side, too weak to move, eyes blinking at the sky like it was a thing she hadn't seen in 1,000 years. He built a small fire a few paces off, the kind you make when you don't want to draw attention. Then he brought water not cold, but clean from his canteen, and touched it to her lips with the edge of a cloth. She choked once, then sipped again and again, until her throat remembered how. Still, he asked no questions, and she gave no answers. He didn't try to lift her, just placed his coat over her shoulders and waited beside her, like he understood that a woman half dead in the dirt needed time before she remembered what it meant to be seen. Her name was May. No middle. No surname she wanted to keep. Not anymore. When she could sit, she didn't look at him, just stared at her hands calloused, split at the knuckles, still caked with the crusted clay of her own grave. One hand had a broken finger, purple and bloated. She flexed it like she was checking to see if pain still belonged to her. He led the mare forward then, looped the reins around a mesquite branch, and returned with a scrap of jerky, which he broke into 2 pieces offering her one without a word. They ate in silence, the kind that doesn't press but lingers. May didn't ask who he was, didn't need to. Men who save you without asking where you've been don't do it for the telling. By the time the fire turned to embers, she stood on her own, staggered once, caught herself. He watched her but didn't move to help. She liked that. When he finally spoke again, it was with his back to her. There's a cabin. 2 days' ride north. Ain't much. Got water. Chickens, maybe. She said nothing. But when he turned to mount, she followed. They rode in stretches. Sometimes through heat that pulsed off the ground like the earth was breathing. Sometimes through wind so dry it scraped the edges of her ears. May didn't ask where the cabin came from. She figured it was the kind of place a man builds when he's got no one left to build it for. A place not found on maps, but marked by the weight of sorrow too heavy to carry further. On the second night, they stopped in a draw thick with sage. She knelt to wash her face in a spring, watching the red clay swirl from her skin like a memory letting go. The moon came up full, casting a pale light that made her feel less like a ghost. He sat across the fire, whittling a stick into nothing, his face half shadowed, eyes fixed on the flames like they might speak the thing he couldn't. She looked at him for the first time. His face was weathered, the kind of rough that doesn't come from age, but from years lived under a sky that didn't care if you made it home. A scar ran along his jaw like it was drawn there on purpose. His hands were steady, but his shoulders slumped in a way that said he once carried something that broke him. She opened her mouth then, not to speak, just to breathe different. And he looked up, just for a moment, and gave the faintest nod, as if to say he saw her, and that was enough for now. They reached the cabin on the third day, just as the sky broke into a wide bruise of purple and orange. It sat at the edge of a cottonwood grove, near a dry creek bed, its boards sun-bleached and warped like an old man's back. No smoke from the chimney, no sound but the creak of the saddle and the wind clicking through the trees. He dismounted first, checked the porch for tracks without saying why. She stayed on the mare until he turned and gave her a nod barely there, but clear enough. She slid down slowly, her legs trembling, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of being unburied. Inside, the place was sparse. One cot, one table, one chair, a shelf with a few books and tins, a Bible untouched, a coat hung on a nail by the door, frayed at the sleeves. He moved like a man returning to something that used to be his, not with comfort, but with the kind of reverence you give to ghosts. She stepped inside after him. The floor groaned beneath her weight. Dust curled in the air. He poured her water from a jug, placed it on the table, then stepped back. That was his way, never too close, never pushing. That night, she lay on the cot. He took the floor, back against the wall, rifle near his knee. She watched his silhouette in the dark, lit now and then by moonlight through the window. His stillness was not the stillness of peace, it was the stillness of a man who didn't expect rest. In the weeks that followed, they didn't speak much. She swept the porch in the mornings, fed the chickens he said might still be alive, and were thin and mean and wild-eyed. He chopped wood without taking off his coat. She patched the holes in it without asking if she should. They became a kind of rhythm. Some days he rode off before sunup, came back after dark, smelling of sweat and mesquite and dust. Other days he stayed close, mending fence posts or tending the mule that limped in the back paddock. Always quiet, always watchful. She asked his name once. He paused, setting down a tin of nails. "Elias," he said. That was all. He didn't ask. Hers. But she told him anyway. Later that night, he said it soft, May, like it was a word he'd once used for something gentle. One evening, a storm rolled in. Not loud, just long. Wind that bent the trees, rain that tapped at the windows like it didn't expect to be let in. They sat at the table. She lit a lamp. He looked at his hands like they weren't his. After a while, he spoke not to her, but to the air. Used to be a boy here. Mine, she didn't breathe. He died. Nothing else came. No details. No cause. Just that. She didn't ask how. Didn't need to. Instead, she reached across the table, laid her fingers near his. Not on. Just near. He didn't move away. That night, they didn't sleep. Not together. Not apart. Just sat in silence while the rain kept talking. And something between them shifted not loudly, not all at once, but like a door left open long enough to let the light back in. The days folded into each other like worn pages of a book. Read too many times but never aloud. Summer leaned into autumn, slow and golden. The cottonwoods dropped their leaves in small, reluctant showers, and the wind carried their whisper down the porch railings like it was delivering news too old to hurt. May rose early, long before the rooster called. She lit the stove with fingers, still raw from the grave dirt that never quite left her nails. The coffee boiled dark and bitter. She liked it that way. Elias drank it in silence, hat in his lap, boots muddy from whatever quiet thing he did before she woke. They didn't speak of before. Not her burial. Not his boy. The air between them stayed soft that way, a kind of hush you didn't dare break. In the late afternoons, she walked the fence lines, ran her hand along the wire like it could tell her how far things stretched. Elias watched her from a distance sometimes, always with that same steady stillness. Not the kind that waits, but the kind that listens. He fixed the roof before the rains. She helped, holding nails in her palm like communion wafers. He never looked down from the ladder, but when the last shingle fell into place, he sat beside her on the edge, and they watched the horizon until the sky went bruised again. She started humming one day while she shelled beans. It came out by accident, a lokio, a tune her mother used to sing when the men were out hunting. She didn't realize she was doing it until he stopped sharpening his knife and looked up. He didn't speak, just listened. The fire at night grew larger as the cold set in. He let her stack the logs, her fingers quicker than his now. Sometimes he read aloud from the old Bible, not the hell parts, just the stories. Ruth in the fields, Elijah in the cave. She didn't mind the sound of his voice. It came slow, like he was translating it back into a language he trusted. One night, she found a splinter in her palm. He took her hand, held it like it might break, and eased the wood out with the tip of his blade. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. She began sleeping through the night. Her dreams stopped clawing. In the mornings, he left her small things on the porch rail. A feather, a smooth stone, once a silver hairpin bent, but still whole. She didn't ask where they came from. She just kept them in a tin on the windowsill like blessings she didn't want to lose. They touched only in passing. A hand to the shoulder when the wind was hard. A brush of fingers when she handed him the matches. But each one stayed with her, like echoes of a language she was beginning to relearn. One evening, while gathering eggs, she found a young hawk tangled in the wire fence, blood on its wing. She called him, panic curling in her throat. He came quick, gentle, eyes narrowed not with fear but care. He wrapped the bird in his coat, carried it inside. They sat for hours nursing it, her fingers working beside his. The bird flinched, but did not fight. When he let it go the next morning, they stood together, shoulders almost touching, and watched it rise slow into the pale sky. Neither said a word. But something else had been freed. The first sign came in hoofprints by the creek, too many, too fresh. Elias found them at dawn, crouched low, fingers grazing the impressions like they could speak. May stood a few feet back, eyes narrowed, arms folded across her chest. She didn't ask. She knew the shape of trouble when it left tracks. "They're looking," he said. Not a question, not a warning, just a fact laid plain. She nodded once, jaw tightening. By mid-morning, they saw dust on the horizon, thin but deliberate, the kind that comes from riders who don't stop unless someone bleeds. May went quiet, packing dried meat into cloth, her hands sure and fast. Elias loaded the rifle and the small revolver he kept hidden beneath the floorboards. She watched him, and for the first time, he looked uncertain, not afraid, but tired, in a way that went deeper than bone. She knew who they were. Men from the settlement, the same who'd watched as she was dragged from her home, who'd stood in silence as the preacher spoke of God's will and turned their faces from her screams. The same who drank while she was buried and laughed when her husband spat on the ground. He wasn't with them now. Her husband. He'd vanished soon after. But the preacher was, and two of his brothers, and the sheriff's boy. She could name them, all without needing to see their faces. "They won't stop," she said, voice low. "They think if you hide me, you're part of it." He looked at her then, eyes flat like hammered iron. "I ain't hiding you," he said. She didn't answer. The cabin held. No place to run. Just four walls, a lock that wouldn't hold, and land to open to vanish in. Elias knew that. So did she. But he didn't suggest fleeing. He started reinforcing the shutters. She helped. Hammered boards across the windows, stuffed cloth under the cracks, moved the chickens into the root cellar. The mule stood quiet in the corner, watching with the eyes of something that knew too well how men burned what they couldn't own. By nightfall, the riders were close. They lit no fires. Elias sat on the porch, rifle resting across his knees. May stood behind the door, pistol in hand. Her heart thudded not with fear, but with something older and ache that came from knowing how easily the world forgets who it buries. Then came the knock. Gentle. 2 taps. She knew the voice before it spoke. Preacher Jonas. "Elias," it called. "You're harboring a sinner. You know what she's done. Give her over." "We'll see it done right this time." Elias didn't rise, didn't flinch. "I seen what you call right," he said. "She's barren," Jonas said, voice slick. "Cursed. She brings death wherever she stays. Let us carry her burden." May stepped to the window, pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to see the men. 6 of them. Rifles. Torches. One had a rope coiled at his side. "I'll carry my own burdens," she said through the wood. A pause. Then laughter. Cruel. Familiar. "You don't get to choose, girl. The land chose for you." She opened the door. Elias didn't stop her, just stood. May stepped out into the night, the pistol loose in her grip, eyes burning. "I bled for this ground," she said. "I screamed into it. It held me when no one else did." Jonas raised his hand. 2 men stepped forward. Elias raised the rifle. "Next step's your last," he said. The night stilled. Even the wind held its breath. May's voice came again, steadier now. "You buried me once," she said. "You don't get to do it twice." The men hesitated, looked at each other. Something in Elias's stillness made them think twice. Jonas spat. "You'll regret this," he said. Both of you, they turned, rode out slow. But May knew they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't knock. The night after the standoff, May couldn't sleep. She sat by the hearth, wrapped in Elias's old coat, staring at the dying fire. The cabin felt smaller now, not from fear, but from the weight of what waited beyond the trees. She held the pistol in her lap, thumb resting on the worn grip, not for comfort, just to remember what she was capable of. Elias didn't speak much. That evening, he whittled a length of wood into something shapeless, let the shavings fall between his boots. Now and then, he'd glance her way, not with worry, but something softer, something close to awe. Before dawn, he stood, went to the door, paused. "They'll be back come light," he said. She nodded. He stepped outside, sat on the porch with his rifle laid across his knees like scripture. May stayed inside, but not for long. She rose, tied back her hair, and opened the chest where she kept the tin of small things he'd left her: feather, stone, the silver pin. She tucked them into the pocket of her dress. They weren't charms, just truth. She stepped outside barefoot. The sky was still the color of ash. Mist hung over the ground like breath that didn't know where to go. Elias looked at her, but said, "Nothing." "I'll stand with you," she said. "You don't have to." "I do." They waited in silence. The sun cracked open behind the hills, bleeding gold across the plain. And then hooves. 5 riders this time, not 6. No preacher, no words, just guns and silence. Elias stepped off the porch, rifle raised. May stood beside him, hands at her sides, eyes steady. One of the riders young, maybe 20, dismounted. He held a shotgun, but it hung loose in his hands. "She ain't yours to protect," he said to Elias. Elias didn't move. "She's not mine," he said. "She's hers." The boy hesitated, and May stepped forward. "You want to shoot me?" she said. "Do it." The boy blinked. His grip tightened. "I'm Barren," she said. "I've bled out more life than you'll ever know. I've buried children and been buried. And I came back, not for you, not for vengeance, just to live, quiet, free." He looked at her like she'd spoken in a tongue he didn't know. One of the older riders shifted in the saddle, uncomfortable. Then the boy lowered his gun. "You don't belong to them," May said. "You never did." He turned, mounted. They rode away, not in fear, but in defeat. Elias exhaled like he hadn't breathed in years. Later, as they sat on the steps, the day warm on their shoulders, May leaned her head against his. "I thought I was done," she said. He shook his head. "No, you just began." Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the birds began again. She reached for his hand, not in fear this time, but in return, the days that followed unfolded like a wound learning how to close. No more riders came. The path to the cabin grew quiet again, covered in soft dust and cottonwood leaves. The chickens returned to their scratching. The mule's limp faded with time. Even the fence held. Elias moved slower now, not from age but from release. The kind of slow that comes when a man has finally laid something down. May spent her mornings in the garden. She planted herbs: first sage, thyme, things that grew low and close to the earth, things that didn't need much to thrive. Sometimes she sang, not loudly, not for anyone, just enough to hear herself in the hush between the wind. At night, they didn't sleep apart. He still didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His hands spoke. So did the silence. One evening, she found a bundle at the edge of the property, wrapped in a shawl too small to be accidental. Inside, a baby, eyes wide, skin pale, lips trembling but quiet. Pinned to the cloth was a note. The baby slept between them in a cradle made from Elias's old saddle box, lined with blankets and feathers. May woke often, not from nightmares, but to check if the child still breathed. She always did. In the stillness, Elias whispered, "She's yours now." May didn't answer. She just cried, silent and full, like the land had finally given something back. The next morning, the cabin no longer echoed like it used to. The silence had changed. It was no longer emptiness. It was peace. Since that morning, the ranch never echoed with silence again. Would you have done the same if it were your daughter? Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe to Silent Ranch. Years past the way cotton drifts across a plain slow without needing to be seen. The cabin aged, but it held. Elias built a second room with his own hands, lumber hauled from miles away, board by board. He never called it the child's room, just the quiet place. May hung a bundle of dried wildflowers above the doorframe and whispered a prayer in her mother's tongue when no one was listening. The child, whom they named Clara, grew like the grass between the stones, soft, stubborn, made for this earth. Her hair darkened in the sun, her skin browned in the wind. She walked with bare feet and trusted eyes. She called Elias Pa before she ever called May Ma. When it happened, he didn't cry, just scooped her up, held her close and whispered, "You're safe now." May heard it from the doorway and smiled, her throat thick with a love she never expected to hold again. Sometimes at night, Clara would crawl into their bed, small fingers tangled in May's hair, one leg over Elias's chest. He'd grunt like it was too much, but he never moved her. In spring, Clara asked why the woman in town always looked away when May passed. "She's afraid of what she doesn't understand," May said. "Like snakes?" May smiled. "Yes, but some snakes aren't dangerous." Clara nodded solemnly and kicked a stone into the creek. The land changed too. Where there had been nothing, there was now a fence lined with sun-bleached bottles to catch the wind. A rope swing hung from the cottonwood. The garden spread wide tomatoes, beans, even corn in crooked rows. Elias grew slower. His hair turned the color of winter fog, his hands stiffer. But he still rose before dawn, still sharpened his tools with the same quiet care. He taught Clara how to track rabbit prints, how to read the shape of the clouds, how to find home in a sky without stars. May watched them from the porch, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, the smell of sage on the breeze. Some mornings she still woke thinking she was in the dirt, that the wind would cover her again. But Clara's laughter always pulled her back. One day, years later, May found Clara sitting by the creek, braiding grass, a sadness in her eyes. "Are you afraid, little one?" she asked. "No," Clara said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About where I came from." May knelt beside her. "You came from a place someone didn't know how to love. But that doesn't mean you weren't meant to be." Clara nodded. "I think I was meant for here." May kissed her forehead. "I think we all were." Later that evening, Elias carved Clara's name into the porch post beneath the others, his sons, May's, and now hers. Not to mark ownership, just presence. A record of who stayed. And beneath it, he carved 2 words in his careful, clumsy hand. Found here,